Imagine a Roman army marching confidently, sure of its victory, unaware that each step was taking them directly into a deadly trap. Suddenly, amid the treacherous landscape of the Rio Pardo, the ambush closes in. The soldiers look around, confused, as arrows whiz through the air and warriors appear from every side. Leading the offensive is Viriato, the relentless leader who turned the geography into his deadliest weapon, watching as his strategy dismantles Roman power. You might think that the Roman army, with all its might and organization, was invincible. But what if I told you that one man, with limited resources but a genius for guerrilla warfare, managed to turn the tide in one of the most humiliating defeats for Rome? What Viriato achieved in that fateful battle wasn't luck. It was strategy in its purest form, using the terrain and the element of surprise as unbeatable allies. Today, you're going to discover how he orchestrated one of the most devastating defeats for the world's most powerful empire. Stay tuned, because what's coming next is one of the most fascinating combat stories in ancient history. Viriathus' story began in the rugged, untamed lands of Lusitania, where he was born into a life of simplicity as a shepherd. His early years herding sheep across the rocky hillsides gave him an intimate knowledge of the terrain that would later become one of his greatest assets in battle. But it wasn't just the land that shaped him. Lusitania was constantly under the threat of Roman expansion, and the young Viriathus witnessed firsthand the suffering and oppression of his people under Roman rule. This ignited a fierce sense of defiance within him, transforming the humble shepherd into a warrior with a cause. As Roman pressure on Lusitania increased, local leaders struggled to resist the might of Rome's legions. Yet, despite their best efforts, the Roman war machine seemed unstoppable until Viriathus rose to prominence. What made him stand out was not just his courage, but his unconventional approach to warfare. Viriathus knew that a direct confrontation with Rome's disciplined, well-trained armies would spell certain doom. Instead, he began employing tactics that were far removed from traditional battlefield engagements, relying heavily on ambushes, speed, and deception. His rise was meteoric. Within a few years, he became the de facto leader of the Lusitanian resistance. Viriathus' understanding of guerrilla warfare came naturally. His life as a shepherd had given him unparalleled expertise in navigating the harsh, often unforgiving Lusitanian landscape. He and his warriors moved with an agility and stealth that the Roman legions could neither predict nor match. His forces would appear suddenly, strike with precision, and then vanish into the mountains, leaving the Romans in confusion and disarray. Viriathus wasn't just fighting a war. He was waging a psychological campaign, undermining Roman confidence with every skirmish. This unconventional style of combat earned Viriathus not only respect from his own people, but fear from the Roman commanders. The Romans, accustomed to structured battles, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Viriathus didn't aim for large-scale victories. Instead, he focused on weakening Rome bit by bit, eroding their resources and morale. What began as a localized resistance soon became a full-fledged rebellion, with Viriathus standing as the face of Lusitanian defiance. Viriathus' transformation from a shepherd to an unbeatable leader wasn't a matter of chance. It was a combination of his intimate knowledge of the land, his sharp strategic mind, and his unwavering dedication to freeing his people. His ability to inspire those around him, coupled with his mastery of guerrilla tactics, set the stage for one of the most surprising and devastating defeats Rome would ever face. By the time Viriathus began making his mark, the Roman Republic had already spread its influence over vast regions of the Iberian Peninsula. The Romans, ever expanding, viewed Lusitania as just another territory to be subdued. They brought with them their superior weapons, advanced military organization, and a confidence born from countless victories. However, they severely underestimated the resistance they would face from the native population, particularly under Viriathus' leadership. The war between Rome and Lusitania was not merely a clash of arms. It was a clash of strategies, cultures, and philosophies of warfare. Rome's strategy in Lusitania was straightforward: overwhelm the locals with sheer military might, crush any rebellion, and establish firm control over the region. The legions, trained to fight in open battlefields, were equipped to dominate in large, set-piece engagements. However, the mountainous terrain of Lusitania, filled with narrow passes, dense forests, and treacherous rivers, made traditional Roman tactics ineffective. The Lusitanians, under Viriathus' command, capitalized on this advantage. They knew their land far better than the Romans and used it to launch devastating raids against supply lines, ambush patrols, and retreat into the safety of the hills. Viriathus understood that to defeat the Romans, he couldn't rely on numbers or direct confrontation. Instead, he needed to fight on his terms. His strategy revolved around exhausting the Romans, keeping them constantly on edge, and preventing them from establishing any solid foothold in the region. While Roman commanders were trained in the art of siege and open combat, Viriathus mastered the art of making the Romans feel surrounded even when they weren't. His men would strike from the shadows, harass the enemy with hit-and-run tactics, and then disappear, leaving the Romans frustrated and unable to retaliate effectively. As the Roman legions pushed deeper into Lusitania, they found themselves increasingly vulnerable. The harsh terrain was unfamiliar, and their traditional methods of warfare proved less effective with every encounter. Roman soldiers were not used to the constant ambushes, the sudden attacks from seemingly nowhere, and the relentless pressure that Viriathus applied. Morale among the Roman forces began to waver as the war dragged on, without a clear victory in sight. The Romans, who had come expecting to subdue a relatively small resistance, were now facing a prolonged, brutal campaign that stretched their resources to the limit. The clash between Viriathus and the Romans was not just a battle for territory, but a battle of wits. Rome, with its overwhelming numbers and discipline, faced an opponent who turned their strengths into weaknesses. Every step the Romans took into Lusitania felt like they were walking into a trap. And with Viriathus commanding from the shadows, the Romans would soon find themselves on the brink of one of their most humiliating defeats. The ambush at Rio Pardo was the culmination of Viriathus' strategic genius. He knew that brute force alone wouldn't overcome the Roman legions, but the terrain could. The Rio Pardo region was rugged and filled with natural choke points, ideal for an ambush. Viriathus studied every curve of the land, knowing exactly where to funnel the Roman forces into a trap. His strategy was to draw them into the narrowest passes, where their numerical advantage would be rendered useless. This wasn't just about fighting. It was about creating the perfect battlefield, one where the Romans would have no escape. Viriathus' forces had been trailing the Roman army for days, keeping just out of sight but close enough to strike when the moment was right. The Romans, marching confidently into the Lusitanian heartland, were unaware that each step they took led them deeper into Viriathus' web. As they approached the Rio Pardo, the landscape changed. Thick forests closed in, and the river's steep banks left them with no room to maneuver. Viriathus had stationed his warriors at strategic points along the river, hidden in the dense underbrush and the high ridges that flanked the Roman column. When the moment came, Viriathus gave the signal, and chaos erupted. His warriors struck from all sides, raining arrows and spears down on the unsuspecting Romans. The legionaries, trained to fight in formation, found themselves unable to respond effectively. The terrain that had once seemed manageable now became a death trap. Roman soldiers fell into the river or were pinned against the cliffs, unable to retreat or regroup. Viriathus himself, leading the charge from the front, embodied the fury of the Lusitanian resistance. His presence on the battlefield inspired his men and terrified the enemy, who quickly realized they were outmatched not by numbers, but by sheer tactical brilliance. The Romans attempted to regroup, but every move they made was anticipated by Viriathus. His knowledge of the terrain allowed him to outmaneuver the Romans at every turn. The legionaries, who had once believed themselves invincible, now found themselves surrounded, cut off from reinforcements, and unable to escape. It wasn't just a battle, it was a slaughter. Viriathus had turned the natural landscape into his deadliest weapon. Using the river, the forest, and the cliffs to crush the Romans in a devastating show of force. This ambush would go down in history as one of the most humiliating defeats for the Roman Empire. The victory at Rio Pardo was not just a triumph of arms, but of intellect. Viriathus had not simply outfought the Romans, he had outthought them. His use of the environment, coupled with his precise timing, ensured that the Roman legions had no chance of survival. The battle was over as quickly as it had begun, leaving the bodies of Roman soldiers littering the banks of the river. For the Lusitanians, it was a moment of immense pride. For Rome, it was a harsh lesson in the dangers of underestimating their enemies. The aftermath of the battle at Rio Pardo sent shockwaves throughout the Roman Empire. Rome, which had built its reputation on the invincibility of its legions, was now forced to confront the fact that they had been soundly defeated by a vastly smaller and less equipped force. The defeat wasn't just a military loss, it was a blow to Roman pride. The Senate in Rome was stunned by the scale of the disaster, and the name of Viriathus became synonymous with defiance against Roman authority. For the first time in many years, Rome's dominance in the Iberian Peninsula was seriously threatened. The loss at Rio Pardo had far-reaching consequences for the Roman military. Commanders who had once believed in the invincibility of their legions now had to reconsider their approach to warfare in such hostile terrain. The tactics that had worked so well in other parts of the empire were proving ineffective in Lusitania. The Roman response to Viriathus' victories was not just a matter of sending more troops. They needed to adapt to a new kind of warfare, one that was dictated by the environment and by an enemy who refused to fight on their terms. This required a fundamental shift in strategy, something that many Roman commanders were reluctant to do. The defeat also had a significant psychological impact on the Roman soldiers. Morale within the legions was shattered. The stories of Viriathus' ambushes and the deadly efficiency of his warriors spread quickly, and fear began to take hold. The once confident Roman legions, who had believed themselves invulnerable, now found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, unsure of when or where the next attack might come. Viriathus had achieved something more valuable than just a battlefield victory. He had planted the seed of doubt in the minds of his enemies, a doubt that would grow with each subsequent engagement. For Viriathus and his people, the victory at Rio Pardo was a monumental achievement. It proved that Rome, despite its overwhelming power, could be defeated. The battle became a symbol of hope for other oppressed peoples under Roman rule. Viriathus' name spread far beyond Lusitania, inspiring resistance movements across the Roman Empire. His tactics, which were born out of necessity, were studied by future generations of military leaders who sought to emulate his success against larger and better-equipped forces. The victory was not just a local triumph. It had global repercussions. While Rome would eventually regroup and continue its campaign in Iberia, the defeat at Rio Pardo marked a turning point in their war against Viriathus. The empire, though still powerful, was forced to recognize the limits of its reach. The battle became a testament to the effectiveness of guerrilla warfare and the resilience of those who fought not just for land, but for their freedom. Viriathus had shown the world that even the mightiest empires could be humbled.